Have you ever stepped off a plane, excited to explore a new country, only to find it feels eerily familiar? You're not alone. In fact, over 1.5 billion international tourists traveled the world in 2019, and with so many people flocking to the same spots, many places are starting to lose their unique charm. Did you know that 47% of travelers now choose their destinations based on Instagram posts rather than cultural significance? This trend has turned once quiet locales into bustling tourist traps. But what does authentic travel even mean today? Is it possible to find the genuine heart of a place when it feels so commercialized? As cultures adapt to meet the needs of visitors, the lines between real experiences and manufactured ones begin to blur. In this video, we'll dive deep into why you'll never experience authentic travel like you once could. From the illusion of authenticity to the impact of social media and globalization, we'll explore how these factors shape our travel experiences. We'll also uncover surprising statistics about how tourism is changing communities and what you can do to find real connections while traveling. So buckle up and get ready to rethink your next adventure. Chapter 1. The illusion of authentic travel. 0-100. Authentic travel sounds like the holy grail for every traveler, right? It's the idea that you can somehow have a genuine, untouched experience of a place. But let's face it, authenticity is often an illusion now. The term itself has been hijacked by the travel industry and social media. We want to see the real culture, the local food, the hidden spots, but what happens when everyone else wants the same thing? Those once hidden spots aren't so hidden anymore. For example, Bali's famous Tigalaling rice terraces have become more of a photoshoot destination than a peaceful farming area. Tourism is one of the largest industries in the world, contributing over 10% of the global GDP. That's a lot of travelers, and with those numbers, destinations have adapted to meet demand. The result? Locals cater to what they think tourists want, diluting that raw authenticity in the process. What's authentic to a local becomes a product for a visitor. Sociologist Dean McCannell, in his book The Tourist, A New Theory of the Leisure Class, points out that as soon as something is labeled as authentic, it loses some of its meaning. It's no longer just for the people who live there. It's for us, the outsiders. If you think about it, searching for authenticity can actually be the thing that destroys it. By hunting down what we consider real travel, we're forcing cultures and destinations to package that experience for us. Ironically, the more we crave authenticity, the harder it becomes to find. The illusion continues. Chapter 2. The Rise of Instagrammable Destinations. 325. Let's talk about Instagram. Everyone loves a good travel photo, right? But there's a problem. In 2021, over 1 billion people were using Instagram, many of them specifically to show off their travels. That means more travelers are choosing their next destination based on what looks good in photos, not necessarily because of its cultural significance. Places like the Eiffel Tower, Machu Picchu, or Santorini have become backdrops for the perfect shot rather than places for quiet exploration. Ever heard of FOMO, fear of missing out? Instagram has made that worse. We see someone post a picture at some exotic spot, and suddenly, we feel the need to experience it too. But what happens when thousands of people flock to the same, hidden, location? You guessed it, it's not hidden anymore. According to the World Tourism Organization, about 72% of millennials say they choose their vacation spots based on Instagrammable locations. But this creates a paradox. By turning travel into a collection of perfect images, we miss out on the messy, unscripted moments that make a trip truly memorable. Some destinations have even suffered from this social media-driven tourism boom. Take Iceland's famous Blue Lagoon. What was once a quiet geothermal spa has now become so overrun with tourists that the experience feels anything but serene. The focus on capturing the perfect photo has, in many ways, devalued the deeper connection to the place. Chapter 3. The Globalization Trap. 750. Globalization has changed everything, including travel. When you visit a new country, you might expect to be surrounded by new things, different stores, unique foods, distinct traditions. But more often than not, you'll find a Starbucks or a McDonald's down the street. And it's not just fast food chains. You'll see the same brands, the same hotels, even the same souvenirs. This isn't just a coincidence. Globalization has made the world more connected, but it's also made it more homogeneous. In fact, according to a UNESCO report, around 30% of the world's cultural heritage sites are now at risk of losing their unique identity because of mass tourism. This makes it tough to feel like you're really experiencing a new place. Instead, it can feel like you're just visiting a new version of the same things you've seen before. A great example of this is Venice. It's one of the most visited cities in the world, and while it still has its charm, it's hard to ignore the way tourism has changed it. Local markets have been replaced by souvenir shops, and authentic Venetian restaurants struggle to compete with tourist-focused eateries. It's a global city now, and while that's good for some things, it's bad for authenticity. As Rick Steves, a famous travel guidebook author, puts it, there are more tourists in Venice than Venetians. That says a lot. What's happening in Venice is happening all over the world. The things that made a place special are slowly being pushed out by things that make it more appealing to a global audience. So, when you think you're traveling somewhere unique, you might just be seeing a reflection of what's familiar. If you're enjoying this content, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Join us as we explore more about the future of travel and what it means to find authenticity in a changing world. Chapter 4. The locals are the new tourists, 12 to 10. Travel has changed local communities in ways many of us don't realize. In some of the world's most popular destinations, locals have had to adapt to cater to tourists. This often means shifting their daily routines, traditions, and even lifestyles to accommodate the needs of visitors. For example, in Barcelona, Spain, residents have protested against the overwhelming number of tourists. Some neighborhoods have been transformed into what feels like an endless parade of souvenir shops and vacation rentals, pushing locals out of their own spaces. A study by the European Parliament showed that nearly 12% of residents in popular tourist cities like Barcelona feel that tourism negatively affects their quality of life. The funny thing is, locals now find themselves as tourists in their own cities. You see this in places like Venice, where the city has become so packed with visitors that true Venetians feel like outsiders. Author Elizabeth Becker, in her book Overbooked: The Exploding Business of Travel and Tourism, explains that mass tourism often transforms cities in ways that make them feel less like homes and more like attractions. This disconnect between locals and their own environment makes it hard for travelers to feel they're experiencing a place authentically. After all, if the locals feel out of place, how can visitors ever feel like they've tapped into the real culture? It's a cycle. Tourists come seeking something genuine, but the influx of visitors slowly forces the local culture to bend to their needs. The result? A city or town that feels more like a theme park than a place where people live. And while this happens, locals become more reliant on tourism for their economy, making it difficult to turn things back. In 2019, tourism accounted for roughly 15% of the GDP in countries like Italy and Spain. That means many communities can't afford to turn away tourists, even if it's hurting their cultural identity. Chapter 5. Manufactured experiences, 15 to 35. Ever signed up for a local cooking class or a traditional dance performance? These types of activities are often sold as authentic, but more often than not, they're staged for tourists. And while they may offer a glimpse into the culture, they rarely represent the true local experience. As travelers, we sometimes forget that what we're seeing is a performance, carefully designed to meet our expectations. Take, for example, the Maasai tribes in Kenya. Many tourists visit Maasai villages to see traditional dances and learn about their way of life. But as journalist Joe Yogerst pointed out in National Geographic, many of these performances are put on specifically for visitors, with a scripted feel to them. It's no longer about showing authentic culture, but rather about showing tourists what they expect. There's a fine line between education and entertainment, and unfortunately, many authentic experiences fall into the latter category. One of the biggest traps for travelers is the idea of the authentic souvenir. In many markets around the world, you'll see the same items being sold, bracelets, carvings, or clothing, that are supposedly handmade by locals. But a lot of these products are mass-produced and sold in bulk to different vendors. Research by the United Nations Environment Program found that more than 50% of souvenirs sold globally are not made locally, despite being marketed that way. This creates a false sense of connection to the culture. To get closer to authentic experiences, try going off the beaten path. Opt for activities that are less touristy or, better yet, spend time engaging with locals in their everyday environments. It's not about avoiding the highlights, those are important too, but about digging deeper into the culture, past the surface-level performances and products that have been created for tourism. Chapter 6. The Future of Travel. Is authentic dead? 19 to 10. So, is authentic travel dead? Well, not exactly, but it's certainly harder to find than it used to be. The future of travel will likely involve finding new ways to experience places without overwhelming them. One strategy that's gaining popularity is slow travel. This means spending more time in fewer places, really immersing yourself in the local culture rather than hopping from one tourist attraction to the next. According to a 2022 report by Booking.com, 63% of travelers are now more interested in slow travel than ever before, as they seek deeper connections with the places they visit. Another approach is to seek out lesser-known destinations. Instead of heading to the usual hotspots, consider visiting places that aren't as heavily marketed or developed for tourism. This not only helps spread out the impact of tourism but also gives you a more genuine experience. Iceland, for example, is known for its natural beauty, but instead of visiting the overrun Blue Lagoon, some travelers now opt for smaller, less crowded hot springs, where they can actually engage with the locals. Supporting local businesses is also key. Rather than booking tours through large international companies, try to find locally owned businesses. Eat at family-run restaurants and shop at markets where you know the products are actually made by local artisans. This not only ensures a more authentic experience but also helps the community. According to the World Bank, in developing countries, tourism directly accounts for 4% of all jobs, but when tourists choose large, global chains, the local economy doesn't benefit as much as it could. Lastly, be mindful of your impact. The idea of leave no trace should extend beyond nature and into the cultural spaces you visit. Respect the customs and traditions of the places you go, and remember that the locals live there long after you leave. Authentic travel isn't dead, but it requires a shift in how we think about our role as travelers. The more we demand authentic experiences, the more we risk commodifying them. Instead, the key is to approach travel with curiosity, respect, and a desire to learn rather than consume.